Good evening, everyone. I'm Marc Courtade, the Executive Director of Huntington Arts Council, and welcome to Conversations in the Arts. And tonight we're delighted to be talking about classical music. I need to thank the New York State Council on the Arts, Suffolk County Office of Cultural Affairs, and the town of Huntington for their general support, which allows us to do programming like this. This idea got put together about 1.5 years ago, and it was just one way of getting people to talk about their art forms and to bring people into our gallery that wouldn't normally come into a gallery. Well, COVID-19 has sort of changed some of that. It would be nice if we could get back together in our gallery, but by doing it and streaming it out, it just opens up, we get to a lot of great people. If you are in Huntington and want to stop by the Arts Council, we have a new show going up called Mirror Mirror. It opens tomorrow. It's up through December 19th. The juror on that was Caitlin Shea from Walt Whitman Birthplace. Thanks to her, and thank you to our participating artist. Next month, the conversation will be on December 10th, and we will be speaking with some terrific Long Island visual artists. The panel will include Jen Guarino, Thais Osorio, Scott Schneider from Toxic Nature Studios, Dan Angelo, AJ Spencer from Art Boy Studios, and the moderator will be Kevin McAvoy, who's a great portrait painter and teacher. As always, I feel like I'm on public television. If you want to hit the donate button while you're watching this, please do so. Help me keep the staff employed. We would normally charge a very small, modest fee for doing this. If you enjoy what we're doing, we would appreciate anything. No gift is too small. No gift is too large either. And I think all of our organizational members would agree with that one. I will quickly introduce the panel in alphabetical order by last name.
Okay.
So Lauren Ausubel, who's the co-director of Oyster Bay Music Festival. Jared Berry, Conductor from Babylon Chorale. David Stewart Wiley, Music Director of Orchestra Long Island, and I just blew my alphabetical order. And last but certainly not least, Lisa Richardson, Soprano and President of eVoco Voice Collective. So we are going to get down to having a conversation. We put together some questions and we will just start this off. I'd like to ask the panel to introduce themselves. And I refer to each of you as part of the cultural landscape of Long Island. So if you could, more from an individual point of view, describe your artistic projects and how you use your art to promote your voice in the Long Island community. Whoever wants to be the first brave person to go out, take it away.
I'll be happy to start. First of all, kudos, Marc, to you and the Arts Council for the incredible work. And over the years, the privilege with our orchestra performing for folk is so great. So thank you for the wonderful work you and the staff do. And to my distinguished colleagues here on the panel, it is such a joy. I look forward to learning from you and sharing ideas and just kind of knowing that we're all in these unusual days together to find positive and uplifting solutions to serve Long Island and the students there. And maybe I'd like to start with that. I think one of the most important things that we do at Orchestra Long Island, the professional musicians and I, love the collaborations that we have with the schools. Many of our musicians were members of the former orchestra I directed on Long Island, the Long Island Philharmonic, and we were able to do partnerships with many schools, win awards for those partnerships. And when we get to the part of the conversation where we talk about the future of music, I'm actually quite optimistic. There's so much talent coming up, and everyone on the panel, I think, can tell stories of the young people they know, they work with. As a parent of 2 teens myself, I see that journey. So very briefly, Orchestra Long Island serves the island. Our musicians and I partner in addition to education. We do summer parks concerts when the pandemic allows us to do that. Recently, we've been moving online, and the whole idea of artistic entrepreneurship is something really important. We were trying to be entrepreneurial even before the pandemic hit. And so we've had to find new ways to reach audiences both live and virtually. And I know we'll talk more about that, but proud and pleased to serve Long Island now for about 20 years, first with the Long Island Philharmonic and now Orchestra Long Island. I also wear many hats. I have an orchestra in Virginia and do composing and piano things. So there are many ways, like my hero and mentor, Leonard Bernstein, inspired to try and reach many different ways through music. And now I'll turn it over to one of my wonderful colleagues.
There you go. Good. Lauren, you're smiling. Go ahead.
We started the Oyster Bay Music Festival 12 years ago. Actually, it'll be our 10th season this coming summer. And my then colleague, Sarah Hoover, and my current co-director, Pippa Borsi, and I decided we have so much talent on Long Island, and why don't we give these amazing young musicians the opportunities to have numerous performances over the course of 7 or 9 days to give them a taste of what it's like to be a performing musician, and also to bring community together in traditional and unique venues to show them that classical music is far from stuffy. And we try to think of unique ways to bring audience together. And over the years, it's been such a rewarding experience because we hear so many positive things from both our participants in terms of gaining experience and also from our audience who love watching these amazing young musicians.
Excellent. And I'll just jump in here. One of the things in my previous life, before I was the executive director at the Arts Council, I worked at Tilla Center for the Performing Arts. And that's where David and I first met each other. This probably 15 years ago. You were always willing to do things like a pre-performance talk when you were in town for one of the orchestral concerts, and just, known him for a long time. And Lauren, Sarah Hoover used to do so much with me, and that was my first connection with Oyster Bay, was through Sarah, and in a small way. And also I discovered, I guess it was 2 years ago, I was at something, and Tammy Hensrud, her husband directed me in a show 20 years ago, and it was just one of the, she remembers me, and man, that's flattering. I wasn't that good. So, there's a lot of just these connections here.
It's nice to see that it really is a community, and people, when you least expect it, you'll see someone you haven't seen in years, and it's a nice thing.
Exactly. For a big island, it's a very small island. So that's nice. Lisa, why don't you come in here and tell us about yourself and go forward?
Well, thank you, first of all, Marc, for putting this all together and bringing us together. That is the first part of a conversation, is you have to meet on one level playing field so that we can have a discussion. And I have to tell you, I don't know if anyone else suffers from this syndrome, but I have always felt like a poser, if you will, because I started out as a flutist. And Miss Moskowitz was my very first music teacher in the 2nd grade. My brothers all ribbed me because they swore I was going to play the recorder. But no, I actually had the privilege of playing the flute. So I immediately felt a kindred spiritness with Lauren as soon as like, oh my gosh, another flutist. But I originally went to music and art as a flute major.
Oh, wow.
And I had a teacher, Mr. Knight, who we were forced, even as instrumentalists, to have to sight sing. And I was terrified to do so. And I convinced him to listen to me during a lunch period. And I made him, and you would never do that these days, but I made him turn off the lights so my friends couldn't see who was going to make this horrific noise. And I sang my midterm so that I wouldn't get into terrible trouble. And he starts writing, and he's got this very serious look, and he hands me this note, and he goes, you go to the head of the voice department. I want you to re-audition for the school as a voice major. Wow. And of course, because I was young and I listened to my teacher, I said, oh, okay. And I did that. And I think I had the worst possible audition. I learned in 2 days how to then. And of course, I sang it having no clue what most of the words meant and pronounced it horribly. Parlo mio bien. As though
right.
Oh, God. And then I spent the rest of my time at music and art, and I graduated as a voice major and fast forward a number of years and a whole lot of miles in between, I found eVoco here, right down the street from my home, actually, at Hofstra. And I don't live at Hofstra, I just live very close. But I was there for the eVoco actually started in 2013. I think it may be the youngest of the organizations here. But I am totally biased when I say this. They had me at hello. I was not part of the original group, which was the mixed ensemble. I showed up for the inaugural women's ensemble, which is the four trebles ensemble, which is what we currently have. And I walked into this room and it was full of just the most incredible musicians. Mm-hmm. And from the first note, and we're under the baton of Dave Freiling, who's just a genius incarnate. It is a joy to sing with him and for him. And from that very first chord, I was just taken. And that was part of the reason why I stayed with voice. And as a flutist, my apparatus was always external. And the concept of making music with my body physically, as opposed to having an extension, which it has plagued me actually, my flute embouchure, especially when I get above the staff and I start singing C's and D's, you know, it's like my flute embouchure always wants to come in. I'm like, I'm not playing. But to be able to connect and sing a chord with an ensemble or to react with one another, there was something that is just transformational in it. And what eVoco was able to do within our community, and we'll get more into some of the programs that eVoco is it's for such a young organization. We're doing quite a lot. I'm proud to just be a member. I'm an enthusiastic member. I think that's how I wound up being president, because of the level of enthusiasm that I have. I can't explain it any other rational way than that. I have a tendency to be Pollyanna and see possibilities in just about every situation. But outside of that, I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this conversation. I'm excited to see where we may go as a small ensemble ourselves. So thanks for having me.
Pleasure. And Jared, why don't you weigh in, please?
Sure. So I echo my colleagues here who, thank you to the Huntington Arts Council for putting this together and bringing many different programs in the music scene together. I happened upon the Babylon Chorale when I came back from grad school. Babylon Chorale is around a little bit longer than eVoco. eVoco has been around 8 years now, and Babylon Chorale last year celebrated our 70th anniversary. So I remember coming back from grad school. I wanted to come back to the islands from Georgia, and I found this job posting. I was like, this sounds somewhat interesting. I'm going to look into it. I applied, and after a trial year, they ended up bringing me on board. And the one thing that really stood out to me and has really caused me to stay with the group is that they really uphold both principles of being a community chorus. As far as being a chorus, they always strive to do their best. And we're talking some people who are music teachers, some who have just always loved music, but in ages across the spectrum, as young as 16 and a little more senior than that. But the other true aspect which I love about the group is the community. They truly are a family. They will work with each other. They will hang out with each other. It's a big social aspect. I remember the first time I really met all of them was at their summer picnic they invited me to. And I was shocked, and they were not kidding in my interview when they said there will always be too much food at our events. And they were right about that. So the fact that they are always so caring about each other and caring about the work that we do to make sure that the music is an educational opportunity for ourselves and for our audiences is something that has really made me become more invested in the group than I perhaps initially thought out I would be. But I truly love all of them, all of its members, and it's really a joy to make music with them.
This is why I work in the arts. It's all coming back to me. It's not to talk to real estate lawyers. It's not to put my spreadsheets together. It's because of this bond in the arts that's just so special and brings people together. I like, community. There's a lot of community here. And I'll tell you, we are desperately needed right now.
Yeah.
And all of the groups here are sort of figuring out ways to keep connecting to our community in a really tough time.
Yeah.
So that I guess I'd like to ask you to please just talk a little bit more about your organizations that you're representing tonight and how you bring classical music to Long Island.
I wanted to jump on Lisa's wonderful word about connection also, and you just mentioned that, Marc, as well.
Mhm.
And for example, when we had to move certain programs online, we had to find ways of connecting with the schools. And through, for example, Nassau BOCES, wonderful organization that's helped us. Joanne Spencer is just an amazing individual, works with us. And almost immediately, we had to find a way of pivoting so that we connected with the students and the teachers in meaningful ways. How can you do a performance when you can't be together in the COVID? So we adapted some of the technology we used this summer. Marc, you alluded earlier to the online recordings that we did with winds, brass, and strings for the Huntington Arts Council. And so we're adapting that and choosing works that will inspire the kids that they can't do alone without our professional musicians. And then we record an initial track and they record with us and we coach ahead of time and play them. So those are the kinds of things that keep the teachers and the students engaged and finding an entrepreneurial way of finding those connections during these days.
Go for it. Somebody else, come on in. Lisa, you look like you have something to say. Lisa, go.
Unfortunately, I typically do have something to say, and I've been practicing, waiting a moment and trying to give others a chance to speak, as opposed to being, the eager beaver that I can be, and just kind of jump right in there. Unfortunately, Jared can attest to I can attest to that. But yeah, eVoco. Gosh, I'm gonna do my best not to just like go on an eVoco tangent here, but it's a group of individuals who are primarily music educators who studied music in some form, fashion, or teaching currently. But it's not only music educators. We have people who are working in finance, IT, you name it, that's what they're doing. We have people who are retirees. We have youngsters who cannot wait until they're old enough to audition for eVoco. And unfortunately, I don't know how many available spots we have. So when we actually are able to better in person when auditions open up again. But that is a fabulous thing. And I think part of the reason that is that we have some really great programs. Doreen Freiling is our special projects chair, and she has spearheaded something which is our Young Artist Award that's going to be coming out yet again here in the late winter, early spring, where we offer scholarships to young people who you don't have to necessarily be a senior in high school. You can be in 9th through 12th grade, and you submit your recordings. And under normal circumstances, you're afforded the opportunity to actually participate in an eVoco recital alongside other eVoco members who perform all sorts of things, any genre, sometimes original compositions. It's a fabulous way for you to have an unusual performance opportunity that is totally free of bounds within the realm of being proper for society. But as an eVoco member, but as a young musician, how often do you have an opportunity to go through a young artist application, if you will, and then have the opportunity to perform that same piece in a live setting with a live audience that is very supportive? Because 9 times out of 10, it's your friends, it's your family, or friends and family of eVoco members. So, you couldn't find a more loving audience. So we have that. But as a result of COVID, we had to change a bit, and midstream, if you will. And it suddenly became whatever the kids sent in wound up being their virtual recital piece. So this year they'll know that going in. And of course, eVoco wound up putting together a virtual recital to go alongside. And it was not something we planned to do. It was something that came off particularly well. I was so happy with what was able to happen behind the scenes and the amount of support that we received within the community as well for that. But whenever we rehearse, the doors are open. You can come to Hofstra under normal circumstances and attend every single rehearsal. And we have another thing, it's called a student invitational. Typically it's high school students, but there was a season where we opened it up to as young as 5th grade for those 10-year-olds who could learn the rep that we invited them to sing. And, you know, your music teacher had to help them with their rep and they had to show up to the rehearsal prepared. And that is a fantastic thing for the young musicians to be able to stand side by side with very experienced singers under Dave's baton and learn how to communicate and learn how to breathe as one and make music as one. And their parents and guardians who brought them to these rehearsals were able to see that, and they were able to experience that same joy and transformation that I experienced. So that having been said, we do have a fair amount of young students who, if they are studying at local conservatories or local colleges, who are chomping at the bit, waiting to audition to get into eVoco if they're able to do so physically to be here and with their musicianship. But those are two of the programs that we have where we are connecting with the community. And there are other things that we do typically in the summer for our lifelong singers. You know, we've had people who have shown up to rehearsals or to our concerts. And, you know, we recently did at our summer sing where we were together still for Ray's Requiem. Jared, I don't remember the other piece we did during that particular summer sing, but we actually had to go virtual this past summer. And instead, thankfully, eVoco has, I didn't realize quite how large it was an extensive collection of recordings of our concert series. And what we've done is to make it something where people could connect, because there are some people who are terribly isolated outside of, you know, the parameters of being safe. You know, if you're fortunate enough to be with your immediate family, great. But what if you're not, you know? So we offered 3 different opportunities to participate in virtual summer sings. They were very well received. We served them at different times. Not everyone could make everyone, which is the nature of, you know, our new norm, if you will. So we will be relaunching that in the autumn and in the winter to give people opportunities to connect in that vein. And I don't want to keep rambling on and on about eVoco, but those are some of the things we're doing in the community. And of course, we cannot wait until it's safe enough to open the doors to our rehearsals yet again and make music with one another. I feel like I'm wandering around in the desert and I'm looking for an oasis of music to be able to come together. I know so many other musicians feel this way because I've had opportunities, a lot of them, to sing virtually. And I'm very thankful for them. And it's a joy to still be able to make music in any capacity. But the idea of being able to be back with a collective of musicians that have a single goal of communicating a musical thought in line with the intention of a composer. It's just magical when we get close. I don't know if we ever fully get there, but we try our darndest to get close.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah. Lauren, weigh in.
So what have we done? Well, normally we're just in the summer. We have like an intense 7, 8, or 9 days of over 25 concerts, which we perform, you know, many at Christ Church in Oyster Bay, which is one of the most gorgeous spaces. I think eVoco and maybe even the Babylon Chorale has been there. But we were actually lucky this summer in that we were able to do the Summer of Hope series live. So 2 musicians got to perform there, and we're absolutely thrilled to be in front of an audience. It was like having your thirst quenched. And this particular summer, we actually had musicians film concerts at Coe Hall and Raynham Hall Museum, which were then shown virtually later on. So, you know, it was better than one. Actually was a chamber music group of 3 phenomenal boys, a cellist, a piano trio. So they were lucky because they got to perform together. And then we had 8 virtual concerts that we put together with personal narratives from the students, which Our audience know all these students, participants, because they've been at the festival for many years. Maxime, who's this amazing pianist, started when he was 9. He's now 17. So they've kind of grown up with these kids. So at least they've had the opportunity to see them, and we've had great feedback just from streaming on Facebook, like a live premiere.
Lauren, I'm really happy you mentioned about the personal narratives, because if there is a silver lining in some of these live recordings and things we can do, it's that we can connect personal stories, and people watching it virtually get little glimpses into the lives and what really moves and motivates a musician, be it a student or a professional. And we had comments after we did our online series. I would get emails from people just saying, oh my goodness, it was so wonderful. The violinist was playing and her cat would walk through.
Yeah.
And I had a little window into her practice world in her apartment in New York. Or someone else, there was, you know, what is that instrument back there? It looks like some kind of an old cello, but what is that thing there? And so it opens a conversation that we haven't or can't have. You know, when I go, say, before a Huntington Arts Council concert, I love going out and seeing the kids there. I love seeing the blankets out front. And then those one-on-one conversations before and after the concert are some of the most meaningful things, where they say, you know, this was my mother's favorite piece. And I am so, you know, I was in tears the whole time they did that. Or, you know, my student plays the oboe and she's really struggling with this. Do you have any advice, David, for something you do? Those personal connections, I mean, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning and makes me love what I do, is being able to do that. So we're taking a challenge and we're turning it into an opportunity, I guess.
I agree with you. I think as much as we're kind of apart because we're on Zoom and FaceTime, it actually has allowed for some intimacy also. You see someone's house, you see their kid run, or, you know, the dog come in, and you do get to see more of someone's personality, which I think actually is really important in performing in general. I think with the festival, we've been telling our kids, engage with the audiences.
Yeah.
We have a theme for a concert. Speak about your piece. Speak about what your connection to the piece is. And it's so gratifying because the audience really loves to see who is this person. And, you know, after the concert, we're like a family with the audience, with our participants.
Yeah. Honestly, I think even if there were no pandemic, we have to be doing more of that anyway. You know, they're the trends that I see, you know, as I travel around the country and do different things with orchestras, slightly shorter concerts, more informed talking, taking more risks in reworking the traditional format of what a concert is, and kind of changing those expectations. And, you know, the pandemic was a little bit, there are 2 books that I was rereading recently, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson and My Iceberg is Melting by John Cotter, both a similar thing about, you know, a scenario where in the case of the mice in a maze, somebody moved their cheese and they had to find a different way to get to it. Or the penguins there, you know, when the iceberg is melting, how do they find a new way of living and surviving and adapting? We were doing some of that beforehand, but it's just accelerated that process. And so back to core principles, right? Connection, beauty, great quality of what we do. I am absolutely convinced that an audience, they don't need to have a music degree to know if something is great or not, that we trust our audiences to trust themselves and give them something really meaningful. And that's particularly true with students, because kids can see through garbage faster than any of us can. You know, when I do a concert for kids, you get that raw, unadulterated response to it. An educational concert is a great litmus test for how we are doing as a society in connecting and inspiring our young people.
Excellent. Jared, you deal with young people all the time.
I do. That's, you know, during the day, as a matter of fact, I had a full day today. I work, you know, as a high school chorus teacher at Manhasset High School. You know, it's the one thing I love is just and this is just my philosophy as an educator, you know, whatever I do in school and I do with the Babylon Chorale, I work the same way. You know, it's really, we are in a field where we're dealing with people. Music is what brings us together, but it's that connection, that interaction, that relationship that we develop with each other. And it really is intergenerational in a sense. You can meet and make those connections with many people. And one of my favorite things about the chorale is, you know, you see these different generations of people coming together to just really make music, and they work together and they talk together, they laugh together, they share food together. You know, it's really a wonderful, wonderful experience. I know you were mentioning earlier about what are we doing, you know, in the classical music scene on Long Island. The chorale usually presents 3 concerts a year, like a holiday theme, a classical theme, usually some type of major work, and then a pops concert. And to be honest, I went into, when I first got hired, I was like, holiday music, great, I got this. Classical music, I can find a major work, that's absolutely no problem. What do you mean a pops concert? But I will say that I have really enjoyed, one of the things that the crowd knows about me is I love coming up with themes, a theme for a concert, but also a theme for the entire season that ties each of the concerts together. And that spring concert has been really a great way in which we are deepening our connections with our audience. 2 of my favorite pops concerts I think I've done, one of them was, you know, a salute to the armed forces. And I remember doing a medley, and we encouraged, you know, members of the audience, if they were a vet, you know, to wave in the air or stand up and get involved. And, you know, people just got such a thrill seeing the vets in the audience stand up, hearing their melody being played. My other absolute favorite had to be a Disney concert that we had done. And at the time it was just after Frozen, and there was a choral arrangement of Let It Go. And I was like, I'm going to do it. And we told people, if you want, your kids can come and they can dress up. And they did. And I told them, I was like, if they want, they can even dance in the aisles. And when the second Let It Go came on, I just remember there were several Elsas that suddenly appeared in the aisles. And then little did I know, they were sort of making their way up onto the podium. So I just casually left the podium, and just watching these young children dancing while there's live music happening behind them. There's not a single person in the audience who didn't have a smile on their face.
You know, this is fantastic. I'm going to mention something because I have seen all of your organizations perform, and that probably you were the first 4 people I thought of when I put this together. But you sort of all mentioned things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about repertoire. None of you have shied away from doing something that is lesser known, or it's too modern. No one will come if it's modern, or you know, just it's too obscure. And I love that. I mean, I'll remember one eVoco concert I went to a couple years ago was the Woman's Ensemble, and you did Rossini's Sacred Songs. Now, I'm a huge vocal person and a huge opera person, and I was like almost angry, like, how come I have never heard these before? They were so beautiful. Why didn't I know these? And it was, you know, well, if you want to sell hundreds of tickets, that's probably not what you're going to put on the program. But if you want to do a great concert, that's what you did. And it was just an amazing all around. Jared, I'm thinking of, I guess it was last Christmas when you did the Baroque piece with the trumpets, where you had the chorus up front and the chorus in the back of a church. And it was just, I'm getting the chills, where you could feel the sound. You know, David, I know you also do, when you put a theme together for some of the summer concerts, when it was, you know, you worked in the Walt Whitman Centennial, right, something with a very obscure piece, or, you know, there's always some connections, you know, and Lauren, I've just said, like, I don't know how the kids find some of these works, and, you know, and then turn around and do them so absolutely amazingly. You know, there's a lot of, the envelope gets pushed a lot, and I like that. I'll give you an anecdote from, you know, my Tilla Center days. So this, I think the year was 2001, and every other year the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra would come. And They were like really fantastic concerts. And Levine wanted to bring the Lulu Suite with Renee Fleming. And my executive director had to tell him, my marketing person says I can't sell this because the audience doesn't like modern music. Well, okay, Bear died in 1935, so I don't think it's modern music in 2001. That's a whole other conversation, but I think things have changed a lot since then. People seem to have a hunger for new repertoire, respect for the old repertoire, but people want new repertoire. And Sharon, I remember another thing you did was it was a March concert where you did two masses together. 20th.
It was the Schubert A flat mass and All Yellow Sunrise Mass.
Yeah, yeah, and you did it, not that piece. That piece you played the Gloria, the Kyrie, the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Gloria. It was just, you just programmed it in a whole new, like, well, this is so obvious. How come nobody ever thought to do it like this before? And it was just an eye opener or an ear opener in a lot of ways. So, kudos for like pushing the envelope, because I think we need that. And it keeps it fresh and it makes you listen. We've kind of said this, but maybe we can go a little further into it, that I like that you're all building the next generation of classical musicians. Your eyes just lit up when you were talking about it before. Talk about it a little bit more, if you would. Lauren, why don't you start us off with this one? Because,
yeah, right up our alley, because, of course, we wanted to bring community together to appreciate in this beautiful art form, but we also wanted to create a training ground for musicians in the 21st century. Like, how do you go out? How do you start up a program? We're kind of a model because we started, just about 10 years ago. And how do you engage audiences, and how do you create themes, and how do you I'm trying to think of a good word, but basically, how can you be flexible? How can you go with the flow? How can you be dogged in pursuing what you want to do? And I think actually with the NISCA grant, we've always had guest artists, and they've been fantastic, like telling our students, go for everything, try everything, be adventurous, take risks.
I would jump in and say Long Island has an embarrassment of riches as far as the diversity of performers, composers, the incredible immigrant populations that continue to nourish our vibrant cultural life. And maybe just going back in time a little bit, I think back to, it took an immigrant, Dvorak, Antonin Dvorak, coming to New York back in the 1890s to say, you know what, American music, in order to be truly vital, you can't just be a repository of male European traditions. You must incorporate Native American, Black voices. You must find a diversity of expression in your history. So now we go to the 21st century. Dvorak Symphony No. 9 from the New World is not new music anymore. But what do we pair with it in a theme? Well, you can have, say, Raynard Burns, wonderful educator, Black composer, an important figure on Long Island, and do one of his new works that might have been inspired by Dvorak's work. And you put the two together and you have something that's not just a museum piece with the Dvorak Symphony, but something that's vital and something new. And, Marc knows I will happily talk about programming until the cows come home, because this is so exciting for us to find those connections. And there are young composers. We've had premieres by teenage composers at some of our education concerts where the students can come. I remember back at the Tillis Center, we would have students come, and up on stage would come to bow after a piece their classmate who had written an amazing piece to play by professional orchestra. And some, I got a letter from a young girl afterwards, said, I want to do that too. I want to write music, or I want to paint, or I want to dance, or I want to be that singer that sang with the orchestra. And I think like everyone else on this group, we got our start and inspired young. I got hooked young with choral singing. That's how my wife Leah and I met, was in a chorus. And without those connections and that inspiration, life just doesn't have the same meaning, I think.
That's
We
great.
are constantly, trying to promote, again, the idea of singing and starting young, whether it's getting students or to come to these concerts or even participating in the chorale. Again, we start, as early as 16. And one of my favorite stories from the chorale's rich history is Christine Gerke was a singer with the Babylon Chorale. And she started with us, back in the day. And she's blossomed into this amazing professional career. And I'm very much looking forward to, she'll actually, one thing that has changed obviously is since we can't perform anymore, we're doing a very different virtual programming because of the pandemic. And she's going to be one of our guest speakers in a conversation in a couple of weeks, early in December, to talk about professional singing and how her career went from being with the Babylon Chorale to this professional career now.
Yeah. That's,
And inspiring for those kids. They need to see that.
yeah. And I'm there. It's on my calendar. And that was one of the heartbreak. I had tickets to hear her do Tristan and Isolde this month, which, hopefully that'll happen in a future season. But it's like, that's disappointing. But this is nice here too. So, did you want to weigh in, Lisa?
I think it's an interesting thing because an embarrassment of riches is 100% correct in David's description. And I could not take credit for our artistic director's repertoire choices, which is Dave Freiling. And he puts together some just amazing ideations of thought and connectivity, through expression there. But one of the things that we have recently been discussing is some of the lack of opportunities. We find that there are so many more people of color available in an orchestral setting if you're looking for, newer pieces of music. And when we were looking at lots of the newer composers for choral ensemble work in particular, it was interesting because there was quite a bit to choose from on the sacred side, but not so much on the just standard ensemble to choose from, and that you could actually place into a program, if you will. And there were people who were wonderful poets who actually had their poetry set by people who were not of color. So there's a start there, but you just cannot grow a composer overnight. It's not one of these, little chia pet things where, in 2 weeks,
Right.
a composer there. You have to have that availability in the different music programs. And I think that also lends itself to some of the different things that are happening. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here because I'm looking at this paper I'm researching at the moment about African-American musicians who actually had this mass exodus from the United States pre-Civil War, not knowing that the Civil War was going to happen, not knowing that the Civil War was going to be won and all these other things. And then, seeking sanctuary in Europe, and how there were simultaneously European musicians seeking sanctuary in America, and that cyclic cycle and the different ramifications of that. But if you look at it not in a vacuum, there are a lot of choral compositions in a sacred setting because I feel that maybe composers of color felt that it was safe to make those creations, and they would be accepted not only by society but by within their own communities. So it's really difficult, when you're looking around and trying to say, okay, Eric Whitacre, love him, but if you are going to say, well, is there a person of color who might have similar offerings? I can't off the top of my head think of one. It doesn't mean that that person's not out there. It doesn't, does that person have a venue? And how do you make it available to these young composers? Where they say, hey, listen, do you have these works? I mean, there could be amazing composers out there that have all of these things in their iPad or in a box somewhere, and they're just these gems, and they just don't have a way of getting it out or being heard. So there's a lot of different conversations that I know that we're having, among my colleagues, how do we bring them more to the forefront, because we know that these musicians are out there. We know the availability is out there. It's interesting to see, and I love the fact that we have so many orchestral options, but there are no words, and words have power, and sometimes words can be scary to people.
No.
Whether you're writing them or whether you're reading them, So I hope we get to a point where we have as many choral options that are not necessarily sacred based and are secular in nature and could just be about, the trees on the mountain or something along those lines, whatever, not to just, I had Floyd in the mind, Carlisle Floyd was working on that earlier. So not that, whatever. But
well, one of the things I did want to talk about, and this I think is a good segue into it, is talking about diversity in classical music.
Yeah.
And David, before you mentioned how you think of classical music in some ways as it's old, dead, white European males, and I think that model is changed, but has anything gone as far as it should go? Well, probably not. But if we could just talk about changing models and adding diversity to this area.
I'd love to weigh in on that, because I have lots of thoughts. And first of all, kind of going back to basic principles, I believe in kind of the Suzuki idea, which is that we are creating great citizens first and musicians next. And if we do music well enough at an early age, those great creative engaged citizens will want to compose and perform. So how do we find a safe place? How do we make them feel welcome and able to join that? We nurture them in education. Then the institution, for example, of the symphony has to have an audition process for hiring professional musicians that is as equitable as it can be. And there is no perfect system. I've done professional auditions for 3 orchestras in multiple festivals for many years. And the most successful model that we use starts behind a screen. So candidates are given a number, they take off their shoes so you can't hear if it's high heels or boots and so forth. And only in the final part of the audition does the screen come down. And even that is not a perfect system. I mean, there was the old way where you would go to the apartment of Toscanini and wait in the lobby and have tea and then play your tuba for Toscanini. And if he liked playing with you, then you're part of the NBC Symphony. Thank goodness those days are gone. And orchestras slowly, certainly not quickly enough, are starting to represent more the diversity of America. I can speak about our orchestra in Virginia. I've been music director 24 years of the Roanoke Symphony, and about 65 to 70% of the hires for the principal positions have all been women in the last 10 years. And that, I just went back, anecdotally, let's see who the principals were that we hired. And we have lots more hires that come from Venezuela, some from Europe, Bolivia, South America, various countries that come. We do not have a well-represented African-American population in orchestras. And so orchestras like the Detroit Symphony and the Sphinx organizations are doing a really good job at nurturing that pool of extraordinary talent to go. And I could go on, but we have to do more. We have to continue to modify our audition process. And ultimately then when it comes down to a music director, being willing to take a risk and hire a diverse group of soloists and composers and say, I believe in this young woman or this man, and I want to feature them. And more often than not, if it's sincere and if it's great, the audiences will buy into it, as will the professional musicians in the orchestra.
Mm-hmm. Someone else weigh in.
Well, I think it has to start early on in our educational system so that, it's not just, primarily my flute students over the years have been kids from relatively well-off families to be able to afford to buy a decent instrument, to pay for lessons. I have a sliding scale, so But even with that, I always am trying to think about how to reach out to different communities, and also with the festival, because we are free, we don't charge admission, and but it's not always so simple to figure out how to create pathways to different communities.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That whole idea of free is an interesting one to me. Years ago, I had a dialogue with our groups. I said, you know, why aren't we doing these educational concerts in the schools for free? Why are we charging? And the point was made that if you give something away for free, sometimes it doesn't have value. It's a tough one. I disagree that there's some things that need to be available to our society, and particularly as a way in for those who can't afford it. And so we're constantly debating, right? Price points and the whole conversation about all the online stuff, which has a really low revenue generation compared to live performance. We're doing, you know, live performances in Virginia, and we're putting those on the internet afterward. Well, what's the right price to charge for that, right? When you can get the Metropolitan Opera for free, you know, some things, why would I charge for this? So big debate, no rights or wrongs.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you know, that does bring up a lot of great points, David. You know, the idea of how can we as arts organizations eliminate barriers to make sure that music education is an opportunity for everyone and that everyone has access to it. The other thing that comes to mind, and I know Lisa alluded to this before, is what exactly are we exposing our ensembles to as far as repertoire? You know, are we doing the typical classical old white male composer repertoire? And is that what's dominating our program? I know personally, one thing that I've tried to adapt in my own repertoire, either at school or with the Babylon Chorale, is the model that was put out by the Institute of Composer Diversity. They have certain percentages or guidelines, best practices really, of what to do as far as percentage of music in a given concert or season by female composers, by living composers, by composers of underrepresented communities. And I think it's important that as arts organizations, we begin to make sure that people can see themselves in the arts organization and that they feel welcome in a safe space to be able to participate.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When I was at Music and Art, we had this office, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of it, but we could go down there at any off period we had or between classes, what have you. And they had all of these little slips, for lack of a better word. And they had several shows available where you could, you know, these little discount ticket things. And if you were lucky enough to not have, you know, I don't know how many rehearsals we had after school in chamber singers. We were always rehearsing until very late hours, and you'd take a 2-hour train ride back, and then you'd start before dawn and do it all over again. But if you had time, and if you had saved your $10 or $15, however much, it was very, very affordable as compared to standard ticket price. You could go, you know, and see a show at Lincoln Center. You could go, and I was not the first year, the second year in LaGuardia. And I know when I went for my audition, which at the time I was as a flutist, my father was very unimpressed with the fact that they had not actually finished the bottom level in the basement where all the instrumentalists typically live. And he goes, honey, are you sure you don't want to go to Brooklyn Tech? No, Daddy, I don't. But the school continued to grow, and they actually finished, you know, and they're there now, and they're right across the street from Lincoln Center, and across the street is Juilliard. But you could, if you had time, take one of these slips, pay very little money, and go see a spectacular performance live right there. And again, transformational as a young person. I mean, think about it. The average freshman is what, if they're very young on the scale, 13 years old, or depending on their birthday, 14 or 15, depending. But imagine being able to see a show like that once a month or once a quarter. I felt like I was incredibly blessed. You know, first opera I saw was Mephistopheles, New York City Opera. We went to see a working, you know, dress rehearsal, and I hated my eyeballs for wanting to blink. I was afraid I was going to miss something. It was so just incredible. And my husband and I are high school sweethearts. And our first date, took 2 of those tickets, and we went to go see Jose Carreras. Who has Jose Carreras as their first date as a kid? You know, he was nervous. He has perfect pitch. He kept yelling out every time they changed key. It was a little bit annoying, but I still married him. I like him a lot. But this is the thing. Music was available to me. How could I not love it? Yeah. You know, when you're around it to that degree and you have that availability. And there are so many kids who just don't have that. And I think the upside, you know, of technology is that there are people in remote locations who maybe don't have access, and you know, maybe they could see a production that the Met puts on, you know, in their HD series, and they do these theater things, and you know, that's great. It certainly is not the same as being live. And if you've not ever had that experience, I highly recommend anyone who's within the hearing of my voice, when we come out of this on the other side, please do everything you can. And I don't care if you get the whatever standing room only seats that you can possibly get, please go, please see, hear, experience this for yourself and be a part of the live music making experience, because it is not the same. Some people may think because I see it, you know, virtually, or I experienced, or I heard it, or, you know, but, you know, whatever streaming device that you participate in, it is not the same. You're not going to get the same reaction from your eardrums when you hear a vocalist make certain sounds. And I'm going to give you a teaser. If you've not ever heard that, I implore you, when we come out of this, go to a theater and have a vocalist make your eardrums do something that they've never done before. And you say, oh, that's what that lady was saying. It is truly magic. Go and watch how the orchestra moves as one. I mean, just unbelievable. The organization as a whole, and how it moves and feels and breathes together. So all of these things, like I said, it's easy for me to love music because I've been around it, not necessarily expecting to be around it my entire life, but I was exposed to it from a very early age. I don't know, it was like 6.5, 7 years old when I started playing the flute. And then when I was in music and art, I changed over to being a vocal major, and I was, 14. So if music is always a part of your life, it makes sense that music is always going to be a part of your life. If you fall in love with something, and I was learning how to read at the same time I was learning, you know, what the different clefs were, you know what I mean? But there are a lot of children that don't have that. And there are a lot of school districts that I have a lot of educators in my family and in my life, and they are struggling to get basic supplies, you know, much less having the arts supported. And I don't know about you guys, but there was a lot of anxiety surrounding the arts, in particular, those educators. When COVID happened, it's like suddenly you have to, number one, justify and validate your worth, which you should not have had to do as a music or art educator to begin with. And then you're having people who may or may not understand just how difficult it is to teach people under normal circumstances, and then be immediately thrown into a virtual setting, have to come up with a new curriculum, have to come up with a new way of engaging people, and then deal with the fact that people are suffering financially, physically, emotionally, mentally, and maybe you're not valuing the fact that they as human beings are also going through all of those challenges. So how do we, in a post-COVID world, address all of that? It seems insurmountable, doesn't it?
Well, I'm gonna jump in here, and this is good because it's going to, you're segueing us somewhere I want to go with this, but I will respond. I think, you know, this group here, the creative group, we've come up with very creative solutions to things, because that's what we do. I think, you know, we normally think so differently. One of the questions we did get was about how are all of our groups funded? And, you know, that has to do with being a not-for-profit organization. And a lot of that is donations, and you know, you got to please the person that writes the check and things of that nature. But it all comes down to, I think, we're kind of paving the way. People are looking to see what the arts are doing and using this as models for other areas. I think great things are going to come out of this, because we're the ones who are at the forefront of, being creative, because that's what we do. And let's face it, with our organizations, have you ever had enough money to do everything you wanted to do? No. So the fact that we're in these tight times, how can I stretch a buck further? Well, my mother and father lived through the Depression doing that. Their families figured it out. We're in the not-for-profit world kind of figuring that out. I will put in a plug here. The Huntington Arts Council does handle the New York State Council on the Arts decentralization grant, and all of your organizations have received funding through that. Right now, I am desperately waiting for the state to pass the budget. I don't know how much money I have for 2021, and I'd like to send my contracts out. It's a rough spot right now. We're prepared to move forward. I need a number, and please don't undervalue the arts, because people need us more now than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would echo that as well for those watching online and supportive, using our voices to advocate, for the vital educational resources for that grant, because this is life-changing. For $1 that they give, it's multiplied many more times.
5.5.
The other things. So I couldn't agree more with that. And very quickly, it's related, but I'll pivot a little bit. As I mentioned at the outset, I wear different hats and love my work on Long Island. This week, I happen to be in Virginia, and we're actually trying a live concert. And this is to your question about revenue. We are forced by the state of Virginia to be at 25% capacity. The musicians and I will all wear masks and socially distance. And honestly, we don't know how many tickets we're going to sell to this yet. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, do we break even? Do we lose money? Is it so important for us to maintain those connections that we do this? Is it a responsible choice to be doing live music while numbers are going up? I think our human souls need it so badly that if we are responsible and we do it in a controlled way, we need to do that and keep that going in our communities to the extent that we are able.
I'm gonna throw something in. The Huntington Arts Council did our Summer Arts Festival this summer. We had to throw everything that we had planned out the window, and then we didn't know what we were doing, and then we came up. We could have 50 people in an audience outside, circles in the lawn, 12 feet apart, not 6, and followed all the protocols. The town of Huntington was so cooperative. You had to register people ahead of time in case you needed to trace contact people. Made it all happen. But without a doubt, every performer came on stage, and the first thing they said, we are so grateful to be in front of an audience. Yeah. And everybody in the audience was just, we're so grateful to be hearing something live. People miss this and they need this. So yeah, if anybody hits the right numbers tonight on the lottery, talk to me. We can do a lot of good with you. We need your help. With that, I want to get to this question because it's kind of meaningful to me. I want to ask each of you, who are the role models or people who inspired you to follow your artistic vision? I'm going to start with, as the senior member of the group here, I remember being in, all through grammar school and high school. I think my one performing arts experience, we were in 5th grade and we got on the bus and went down and heard the Buffalo Philharmonic and saw a concert, got back on the bus, came back to class and opened our math books. There was no talk about it. There was nothing. That was like my only exposure. How I wound up working in the arts, I don't know. Was I dropped on my head as a child? I think, you go where you need to go. But what I do remember, and he was not a personal mentor, but you mentioned him before, David. I grew up during the Bernstein the concerts for children. And then, that gets back to where we almost started talking. That's really the first person who started talking to audiences and engaging with audiences. Those had a massive effect on me. That I don't think anybody's done anything quite like it ever since. And, I will just mention that. So whoever it was that got through to me, thank you for getting through to me. In a time when the arts in school were just not there, period. So who gave you the passion? Who got you on the path you're on?
Well,
You want to go ahead?
I'll just say that I came from a very musical family. My mom actually started me off on piano, which did not last very long. But she brought me home a record from the library of Julius Baker. Lisa, you may know Julius Baker was the principal flute of the New York Phil, and I just fell in love with this flutist and the sound of it. And so I did have a decent music program where I grew up on Long Island, and so that got me started. And then there are all these great youth organizations on Long Island, like the Long Island Youth Orchestra, which I was a member of, and then I was in a pre-college program in the city. So, it just kind of took me on this direction and journey, which has gone through teaching and performing, and now doing administration for this festival. So it's been great to have all this variety.
So for me, my grandmother was very influential. There were no musicians or artists in the family. She had lived with us, and I remember, the piano room was right above where, her kitchen area. And I remember just practicing, and I would hear thump, thump, thump from underneath me if I was making mistakes, meaning to go back and fix it. She was always very influential, and my parents were always very supportive. I will be honest that the arts and music was not something I ever intended to go into. My mother will often retell the story that she dropped me off at college orientation. I decided to go to Hofstra. I was going as a business major, really looking forward to it, dropped me off, and then picked me up. I had registered for classes, and she said, "How was it?" I said, "Great. I'm a music education major now." And she almost did a double take, and she goes, "What?" And I've made the right choice since. And, one of my biggest role models and inspirations really has been one of my connections at Hofstra, and even before then was Dave Freiling, as far as music goes. And I've learned so much from him, and I've worked so much with him over the years in many capacities. So.
Well, I'll go next, David, if you don't mind. I alluded to before that I was a flutist first, and I think the most encouragement I actually received was from my middle school music teacher, Edward Fishkin. He's not on Facebook, so I don't expect that he's watching, but his wife may be, because he doesn't do the Facebook thing. But he's an amazing man, and he encouraged me to, as long as I didn't avoid or allow my flute playing to diminish in any way, he allowed me to play every single instrument that my parents would buy mouthpieces for in his band room. And he, from the earliest hours in the morning, as early as I could get to school, I never actually was able to get there before him, but from the earliest hours until, however was appropriate after school, he would let me play. He would let me take instruments home and practice on them. And as an instrumentalist, I felt like everything was possible. And when I got to music and art and found my voice, if you will, there was a distinct moment where I saw a production where Grace Bumbry was singing Carmen. And I immediately thought, it just shows you how foolish I was. I immediately thought, oh my gosh, Uhura from Star Trek can sing, and it was a very wrong observation. But I was so impressed. And, then I really started looking into several different singers, in addition to all of the big names that we knew, like Ms. Price, who I would walk by and you'd see her, huge, bigger than life. It was like one of her last seasons doing, I believe, Aida and different things. And so many singers that were out there, and Kathleen Battle was out. And then you had Denise Graves, and then you had Audra McDonald, who very famously, Thomas Grubb stated that she dripped consonants. I mean, just listening to this woman sing, just absolutely breathtaking. So there are so many musicians that, and then you would hear someone like Samuel Ramey, and I just get goosebumps. And that might be one of the many reasons why I'm so in love with Jared's voice, because, I love a bass, There it is.
David.
I love hearing these stories from my colleagues, and I get asked often, what's your favorite piece? Just like, what's your favorite food? Well, I like pizza, but I wouldn't want it all the time. And I think for many of us, we have so many influences, even conversations early on in our lives that shaped who we are as people and as musicians. But maybe I'll share a brief story that kind of leads into my philosophy as being a conductor and a music director, because truly it's the most humbling thing in the world. We don't make a sound. We are dependent on others for making a sound around us. And all we can do is facilitate if we're really doing our job well and anticipate and other things. So I was a young boy growing up in Boston. My mom played piano. My earliest memories were that. And we would go to Symphony Hall, Boston, every Wednesday. I would have my piano lesson, and then we would go have food at the Burger King a block away from Symphony Hall. And then we would go, and one of the musicians in the orchestra knew me. My sister was a violinist and knew that I was a pianist and composer, and said, would you like to go backstage and meet Leonard Bernstein after one of the rehearsals? I was like, wow, he was just doing, an overture with the orchestra. So I backstage, and my first memory was watching him argue with an elderly woman in the corner. She thought his Mahler was overrated, and he was defending his interpretation of Mahler to this woman. And it was like, this woman is arguing with Maestro Bernstein. So I kind of listened for a while, and then they introduced me, and he kind of looked me over and said, oh, yes, Mr. Wiley, why do you want to be a conductor? And I think I mumbled something about my love of music and being on stage. But 30 years later, my answer would be totally different. It's about that conversation. It's about advocating for things we believe, connecting with people one-on-one, having the courage to stand up for what we believe in, and being involved in larger things that matter, building an orchestra. And it's interesting, Marc, you mentioned the whole young people's concerts. I tried recreating some of those when I was with the Minnesota Orchestra. We tried recreating them, and it just didn't have the same vibe. And I'll tell you what my theory is, and in talking with members of the Minnesota Orchestra and staff, why we thought that was the case. Those young people's concerts were as much for the adults that brought the kids as the adults. He was able to, for example, fuse Eleanor Rigby with a great thing. And so he was able to transcend generations with his conversations about that. And television was new, right? Now, we know with the social dilemma and all of these other things we see on net, that we are drinking from a fire hose with the internet. How do we know our audiences and change what we're doing? The programming I do on Long Island is completely different than the programming I do in Virginia. I infuse bluegrass in Virginia. We go down to the coal fields of Grundy where the coal is on the windows there, and set up, and I'll start Beethoven 5, ba 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 ba, and the kids will stand up and burst into applause. They're like, yeah, this, and I'm like, this is a visceral response, and this is the world that we live in right now. So I guess if I had to pick one, if somebody said, David, who is it? Because he was a composer and an educator and an advocate, and someone who advocated for human rights and advocated Jewish composers and broke barriers as an American conductor. But I could also say the same about Duke Ellington. I could say that about George Gershwin. I could say that about Miles Davis. I could say that about Elon Musk, Anyway, it's a fun subject.
This is really good. It's like, how do I get this? Got to watch the clock. Got to get this in. I do want to touch on this, and you just perfect segue. I want to talk about, consider American art forms, and I will throw in musical theater, modern dance, jazz. Do you think American classical music world crossovers should include representation from these genres? And it does, but you guys go. I'll shut up. Talk about, the possibilities.
I'll be brief. If we don't incorporate those things, we will die. Simply, we have to embrace the diversity of all of these other things in creative and wonderful ways. It doesn't mean that we have to have a dancer on every program, but we have to be willing, say, to do Copeland Appalachian Spring on the first half of a concert, put the orchestra down in the pit and have dancers, and maybe do it a second time with dancers after intermission, you know, just as one example of something that could be done. Would it work? I don't know. I haven't done it yet, but it's an idea.
You know, we actually, a number of years ago, were approached by the Gillespie Ballet, and they wanted to have some of their student dancers collaborate with us. So we had, again, in Christchurch, we did Pachelbel Canon, and we had musicians, you know, in different areas of the church. The dancers came down the aisle, and then they led the audience out of the church across the walkway into the parish hall, where we had another group of a quartet for Pachelbel Canon, and the dancers continued and finished the performance in the other space. And it was very cool. It just takes a lot of coordination to make something like that work.
I will say I've had the luxury of working a few times with a director on several Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. And when he's stage directing, one of his famous quotes that I love that he says is, "Collaboration is only a dirty word during the German occupation of France." And it's so true. The world can benefit from more collaboration right now, especially in the arts. And it's not just limited to, you know, dance and theater and music, but even our visual artists, even our written artists, you know, every form of art needs to work together. And that's really what's getting a lot of us through this pandemic right now.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Lisa.
If we remove the dirty word from this equation, which is funding, I think that if we had limitless resources, we would see a lot more collaboration. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen because of that dirty word funding. That, you know, to be able to do something like that, you really do need the time and space, and many times time and space are expensive to bring us together. So if there are ways, and you always have to look at both sides of a coin, and in the COVID coin, as Jared was alluding to, there are so many needs and appetites for the arts, and there are so many new ways that people are being creative and finding ways to collaborate and make art, you know, as a whole, not just in the setting of music, but performing arts, or, you know, a new definition of art. You know, let's define it as something new. And that's what's happening. And there are some really exciting things that are occurring. And it may not be to the degree where we have really large productions, but it's where these grassroots, you know, amalgamations of ideas that are happening and that are springing up. And it is just incredibly exciting, some of the things that are out there and available. And I hope that funding is no longer a dirty word, and that, and when we get to the other side of this, that something like these Zoom settings, that we can have a hybrid of, you know, encouraging these not necessarily young, but new styles of art collaborations, and things that we had not really given much thought before this new reality. And maybe that will be some of the upside of, you know, the other side of COVID, if you will.
That's fantastic. You know, one thing, you know, I'll mention our grant program. One of our priorities, you know, if you do these, you will score higher. And, you know, we want interdisciplinary projects, and we don't see enough of them. And I have yet to see a really good visual arts component in a, you know, a music or dance setting. And they're just, you know, nobody seems to have figured that one out. Just to give you an example, the Summer Arts Festival this summer, one of our local musicians, fantastic guy, brought a buddy of his who painted a piece on stage while they were while he was playing music, and it was just by the end of the concert there was a new piece. Was it inspired by what I was hearing? I don't know, but there's a conversation in there. I think there's a lot of things like that that can do that, and you might get somebody new who's never, I've never gone to a concert, but I do love visual, and vice versa. So maybe I'll plant some seeds here. Think as creatively as possible, because that's when really good art happens. Also, because you keep going to it, I do want to talk about this age we're in of COVID. We can't ignore it. You've all successfully been doing things using technology. So maybe just a little very specific here. David, you did 3 concerts for us this summer, and they were taped ahead of time, and we streamed them on Sunday nights. Would you just talk about how you put those together? Did you use a click? Were you conducting?
So there are different ways of doing it. The way we did it with it, for example, with the string program, we did one of my film pieces of film music, which is for piano and strings. And I recorded the piano part first. And then our engineer, who turned out in South Carolina, wonderful guy, Kyle Lane, very creative and a composer himself, he creates the click track on top of my piano part, and then the musicians each get sent that link, put their headphones on, watch the screen, and play along. Then he comes back and digitally masters it. And you can do this with multiple layers. We've also, worked on educational things. I've done with other orchestras, different things. The challenge with live, and maybe my colleagues can also share their experiences, is the issue with delay. People get asked, well, why don't you just have a conductor? For example, if I were to ask us to do, and I were to pull my piano in here and do Star Spangled Banner, the delay between what I'm playing and the singing and it coming back to me makes it almost impossible to work. But there are new technologies that are coming out. Somebody sent me a video of the San Francisco Boys Choir, which has a brand new thing that almost immediately gets rid of the delay there. And they are able to have live rehearsals with the boys choir together. And so seeking out those new technologies, the person, just like the invention of the iPhone, the person that does this technology that allows us to really do it well online with no delay, is going to really help us be successful with that next step of recording.
So I've actually sort of experimented just a little bit with that, just to play off of what David was saying with the live. I've used, experimented with sound jack and a couple other things, and it's been interesting. There are definitely some quirks involved, but I'm really hoping that they're able to work something out, even if not to happen during the pandemic, but something for down the road from now.
Mm-hmm. I think we're creating the way of the future. We just don't know what we're creating yet. And I think, it's, you throw enough stuff at the wall, what sticks is what's going to work. And, there's something that's going to happen out of all of this. But Jared, if you just explain a little bit more about what you're doing on Monday nights. Since the chorus can't get together and rehearse, you're taking an opportunity to really teach people.
Yeah, so one of the things that I proposed to the board was I wanted to find ways in which we can continue our musical education of our members as well as the community. So I created this virtual Monday series. Back during the thick of COVID in the spring, I was basically meeting with the chorale on Monday nights in lieu of rehearsals online and doing some theory, musicianship, and sight singing practice with them. And I wanted to take it in a different direction. People really enjoyed that, but I wanted to utilize Zoom for what we could. And now I'm bringing in guests from all across the United States, really, to speak on different topics. We had someone speak a couple of weeks ago on Haydn's creation. Someone talked about Beethoven 9. We had someone talk about a brand new work, Joel Thompson's 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. I'm just trying to think of some others. I know I gave a little information on Jewish High Holy Day music. A leading expert on spirituals come in and talk. The idea is that we're bringing in these experts from across the country to be able to speak to our community. And it's not something we'd normally be able to do. You know, as Lisa said before, the whole idea of funding, to be able to fly someone in and give them lecture time, it's costly. And here we are, we're able to use Zoom as an opportunity to bring our community to them. One thing that I have made very clear to our guests is that it's not just a presentation. It has to be an hour presentation. I would love an interactive component, and they've all been great about that. But then there is dedicated 15-minute time at the end for Q&A, because I want the members to be able to interact with them. And it's really been phenomenal. I've heard so many positive things from our members who have attended and others from outside, from the community who have attended. Marc, I know I've seen you in a few of them.
They're wonderful. They're wonderful.
And, you know, that's our goal, is to just continue bringing the larger musical community to our community.
It's like, you know, it's like you're making lemonade. You know, you're making really good lemonade, and that's refreshing. And it's like, you know, I had a board meeting this Monday night, so I couldn't be on. It's like, I really wanted to hear the second part of the musical theater talk, you know, rats, you know, but I do like getting a paycheck, so the board meeting was important, you know. Lauren, if you would talk about, you know, how you did the festival this summer, because you did your festival.
We did it. We had 8 digital concerts so far, and actually, we had one of our wonderful singers who just finished her master's at San Francisco Conservatory, who helped us put together the concerts. And some of them were recorded before COVID, you know, maybe it's someone's recital, grad recital, and some of them were recorded, you know, at home. So we had some air conditioners in the background. And some of them, as I said, were recorded in an actual venue, and then we put it into a performance. But I thought it was kind of fun that we could, you know, insert some humor into the videos, and we could kind of customize them for each concert, you know, so that was fun. And I thought, that's great. We can continue doing that and bring me in, you know, throughout the year. We're normally just during the summer, so.
And they were great. And this was another case, probably the soprano you're talking about. She sang a modern piece. It's like, why have I never heard of this composer before?
Yes, I'm trying to think. It wasn't Jake Heggie. It was, I forget.
Yeah, but it was, I have it written down. It's in the other room. But it's like, it really like, I got to remember that. And I wish more people would do this. But yes, she also did some Jake Heggie songs. So, yeah. I mean, you know, don't see those programmed a lot either. So kudos. Lisa, how's eVoco managing?
Well, you know, it's interesting trying to reimagine wearing the badge of super spreader with all that we do. So one of the things that really went well this past summer were the summer sings, and I alluded to that, and we're going to be going back into that for autumn and winter. I know Dave Farley is deciding which pieces we will bring to everyone. But the fabulous thing about these virtual summer sings is that you don't need to be able to carry a note in a bucket. I mean, you can literally have 0 singing experience. You can open up your mouth and voila, the sounds of eVoco will come out. As long as you have your microphone muted, no one will hear what you're doing. And people do seem to enjoy that because, you know, they wish sometimes that they could sing with eVoco. And that is one of the ways that we can get together virtually. The music is provided on the screen, so there's no cost involved. Literally, all you have to do is click on our Zoom, join us, it's all there, Dave Farley is there, literally conducting us in a virtual setting because we are following along with the recording. So there's that. But we also have that great young artist program that's coming out, and our virtual recitals where we will have people, you know, safely either submitting things, because kids are actually getting really good at, you know, getting over their shyness. I know when COVID first happened, a lot of kids did not want to, they would agree to maybe sing, but they didn't want to do it on camera. You know, there were several different things. And now, you know, there's just like jazz hands and, you know, everyone is coming out of their shell. which is fabulous. So we will have our young artists and people putting in for that. And what's fabulous about that is that, again, you can be anywhere between the 9th and 12th grades to qualify for this. And the scholarship awards, we give away for a total of $1,000. And you don't, it's just for you to use for, even if it's just buying sheet music or, you know, going to a concert. How you use the money is up to you. But the first place, I believe, is $500. Second place is $250, and there are 2 third place prizes for $125. And of course, the winners will be part of the virtual recital. So and that's, of course, we also have eVoco members who are submitting their pieces. And again, you know, sometimes we have unique compositions from our eVoco members, as well as standard rep, smaller ensembles. I mean, we've had some really interesting things come out, and we've seen some instruments you don't typically see, but just yeah, we've not actually had anyone show up with the long sack butts. You know, I got myself in trouble once, and I was talking to a 12-year-old, and you know, I was talking about, you know, the ancestor to the trombone, and I used the word sack butt, and the mother looked like she wanted to choke me. She's like, okay, she's going to say this every night at dinner for, you know. So I just wanted to share that with the rest of the viewing audience. There you was, my gift to you. Google it. If you don't know what it is, look it up.
Look, there you go. This has been amazing. I mean, I hate to say this, we've talked for an hour and a half, and we've still got about 5 more questions to go, but this is what happens. For an hour and a half a month, I get to talk to artists, and I don't get to do that often enough. At least, you know, it's happening like this. I can't thank you all enough for joining us tonight. Lauren Ausubel, Oyster Bay Music Festival, Lori Richardson, eVoco Voice Collective, David Stewart Wiley from the Orchestra Long Island, Jared Berry from the Babylon Chorale. And I'll finish up with one thing that I was reminded of in a comment. I don't know, Jared, if you know Lori Oldacre. She's the art teacher in Manhasset.
I do know Lori.
Some of your kids are in our next show from Manhasset. They've entered our show, a blind jury, and are in the show. Maybe we could put some cool stuff together, visual and musically. Just throwing it out there. Happy to help, happy to discuss at any point, but small world, isn't it? So thank you so much for joining us. Marc Courtade, Executive Director of the Huntington Arts Council. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you very much. Join us next month. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, my colleagues.
Great to meet all of you.
Likewise.